We are here with a very exciting guest, Kimberly Brenner here. We're going to be talking about the history of coaching. And I just realized the history goes much longer than I was born because Kimberly Brenner started coaching in 1994. I'm looking at that. I'm like, that's when I was born. So it's a really longer than a lot of the coaches that are here. So we're going to talk about what, what, it, ho- why do we learn history? I think one of my favorite subjects is actually history, and I want to kind of frame this. And I've seen this with my clients, with myself as well. Is if we understand our own story, we understand how we're showing up in the world. We understand our own path. And usually, I found out with my clients as well is when they don't know how to connect their own story with to their past, and they don't know how to make sense of it, they don't know how to process it. They usually have stuck points right now, and I do a lot of work in that area. And personally, for myself, I've had to really work on that area and deal with a lot of those things. And when I look at history at a bigger level, it's the story of humankind. A lot of people don't know history. And this is why we have phrases like history repeats itself, because none of us know what's going on. And then in this case, in this context, the history of coaching will help us understand how it's evolving and how you can leverage that to build your coaching business and actually see where it's going, because it is very exciting. And when you look at the evolution of coaching, because it is blowing up. But what does that mean for you? So tune in, because Kimberly is going to inspire us with her perspective on coaching, and where, because she came in the beginning stages of coaching when there was Tony Robbins and some of the names that I didn't even know that Kimberly shared. So she's going to talk about it. It was Thomas Leonard and all these guys who were in the beginning of coaching world, and what was happening then and what has been happening since. Now, Kimberly is also an author, and she'll talk a little bit about that. She works with couples at this point. She's worked with individuals and couples in the past, but she works with couples right now, and I've heard her perspective on it, and she's a master at it. So I'm excited to hear her perspective on that as well. I want to get Kimberly to get started. Kimberly, maybe you can get started a little bit about your journey as to like just an overview of what got you into coaching and what has helped you keep going all these years to this day. And you're still doing this work, you're still serving at the highest level. Please share. It's so great to have you on our podcast.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Marcel. Thanks. Hi, Daniel. You
Hi.
know, many years ago, I was talking to a lawyer friend of mine, and I said, people come to me to figure things out. My whole life, I was like, why do people do what they do? And I've been doing that since I entered high school, studying people. Why do they do what they do? And so I'm talking to this lawyer friend, and I said, I really want a business where I can help people figure things out. And his response was, there's no such thing. Now, this was back in the 70s. And he says, there's no such thing. And I'm like, okay. So I believed what this lawyer was telling me. I thought he was a lot smarter than me, but I already knew that people needed to figure things out and they were coming to me already. But it wasn't until I was sitting next to somebody, another therapist in a classroom, and she was enrolled in Coach U. Now, Coach U was the very first coaching school created by Thomas Leonard back in the early 90s, 1992. Okay. And I'm like, really? There's a school like that? But I was already doing coaching. I was an executive performance coach for corporations back then. But it came from NLP, neuro linguistic programming. I got very involved with that back in the late 80s. In fact, I decided with my last dollar, I'm telling you, I was so stretched with my money at the time, but I went and flew to Switzerland and studied with the premier people in NLP for an entire month and a half. I know I would open my window and look at the Swiss Alps. It was the most incredible experience. And then when I came back, I started a company called MetaPower, and I would help people make their whatever goal that they had. I would help them achieve it in 6 sessions. And that was my magic number. And it still is my magic number. So that was my beginning of coaching back it was in 1990, I think. And that's when executives were hiring people. But I want to talk about the history of coaching, not so much about my history. And by the way, I did study with Thomas Leonard. I did have the privilege of studying with Thomas Leonard and studying with Tony Robbins when he very first started, where he would say, I will fix your problem in one session. And I would follow him and I would go, okay, my challenge is I'm going to fix your problem in one session and play the game. But anyway, the interesting thing about coaching, if you really look at coaching, what was it? Helping people with self development, going within. It started back in before BC with Aristotle and Socrates and Confucius. Can you imagine what it would feel like if you got to sit down with those people and just listen to them? I would be in awe. I would love to do that. So for me, sitting and listening to Tony Robbins or when Thomas Leonard was alive or anybody, it's such a privilege to learn from wisdom. And I think that's what coaching is. You learn from wisdom, you give your wisdom, and you bring the wisdom out in the individual. And that's what you did for me, Cassell, when you spoke with me a couple of days ago. You brought the wisdom out in me. And that's what makes a great coach. And I appreciate that. So coaching, really, the word coach, this is so interesting. In the 15th century, in a Hungarian little town, somebody created a buggy that was run by somebody else. Back then a buggy was you did it. You got behind the wheel of the horse, so to speak. But they created something where somebody else drove you and they called it a coach. And the whole definition of the coach was getting you from one state to another. And that's what it meant. And so in the early 20th century, that terminology was used in sports. If you look at the Olympics, they would hire people who knew how to make you better in sports. And eventually, years later in colleges, there was something called sports psychology, like looking at how do you think? How do you win? And then it translated through therapists and psychologists into working with individuals. The whole self development program started in the late 20th century. And it wasn't until the 21st century that there was actually an organized group, and that was created by Thomas Leonard, where he created Coach U. And then he decided, and back, can you imagine paying $5,000 back in 1992 for
That's
a
a lot of
coach?
money.
That was a lot of money. That was a lot of money. And so what Thomas was noticing is that the people that were coming, he wanted more people to learn how to coach. So what he did is he took a hiatus from Coach U. You know, when you look at his history, it says he never sold it. That's not true. He did sell Coach U, and he did so, and he took a 5-year non-compete clause. And during those 5 years, Thomas lived in an RV and he traveled everywhere. And he spent 5 years formulating something called Coachville. And he wanted it to be more affordable for people. So when he offered it back in 1980, what was it, 1980, no, 1997, I think, he was charging $895 for a lifetime coaching program. And of course, I jumped on it. I couldn't afford Coach U back then, but I could afford Thomas's Leonard Coachville. So I jumped on his coaching program. And what people need to know about the coaching is there's a skill. How do I coach? And then there's a business. How do I turn coaching into a business? And I know that's what your program does. You not only do the skill development, but you're also looking at how do I turn this into a business? And that's the evolution of coaching right now, where before the individual would hire you as a coach. So you needed that top level skill. But now, if you're going to create it into a business, which is the direction of coaching, you need what you have to offer. And that is teaching them how to turn it into a business. So that is the history of coaching. So Tony Robbins, I think, is a pretty well-known person who coaches. And again, he focuses on your internal structure. Hey guys, do you remember walking on fire?
Yep.
Huh? Was his thing, where it was mind over matter. Where if you can help the individual recognize there's something within that is keeping you from achieving, and then work on that as well as the what to do, who to be. I look at it that way, who to be and then what to do. And then turn that into a business. And then with the internet, when coaching started, we didn't have the internet. It was all word of mouth. I would knock on doors. I would go to organizations. I would talk to people about what I did. And they would look at me like, really? Oh, that's so interesting. And it was unique. It was unique. But now it's not. And I think it is more difficult to get that person to hire you because there's so much out there. It's a smorgasbord of coaches out there. And how do you pick one? How do you know to pick that particular person?